I think I just read the wildest, craziest thing that I have seen in quite some time. And it has to do with someone that we know pretty well.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also, we are on YouTube as well. So just search Locked On LSU in the search bar. You can subscribe to the channel so you get notifications whenever the podcasts go live. You can like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, all of that great stuff. Just appreciate you for being here and always appreciate you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Well, I got to get into this because this might be the craziest thing that I have heard in quite some time. And that is saying something, especially in this job when weird stuff comes out in sports all the time. Like Britney Spears sued Victor Wembanyama, the number one overall pick in the NBA draft. And I think this is crazier than that. And so that it is saying something. And I want to get into it. But first, I want to provide a little bit of background. This has been a story that's been out long enough, so I'm sure that you probably have heard about it, at least not in its entirety, but to some extent. And that is the Northwestern hazing scandal. So I believe it was this past Friday, so almost a week ago today. A former Northwestern football player sat down with a member of Northwestern student newspaper and highlighted what he went through as a Northwestern football player. And it was several accounts of disgusting hazing, of sexual abuse, emotional, physical, verbal, and sexual abuse that went on within the Northwestern football program. Just, if you haven't heard the specifics of it all, I'm not going to get into it on today's podcast, but there are several accounts of it with more details about what went on exactly behind closed doors and this former player's experience with the Northwestern football program. So I urge you, if you haven't heard the details, I urge you to go look it up, to go research it, just see exactly why all of these conversations about Northwestern football are going on and exactly why they are so serious. So, a long account of disgusting examples of hazing and what this former player went through. And there's been a whole lot of stuff that's happened. And I say stuff, and that's just, it's scraping the surface of the news that's been out there and the reports from former players, current players. Well, initially, when this report came out, the Northwestern president, I believe his name is Michael Schill, he suspended Northwestern head football coach Pat Fitzgerald for 2 weeks. Now, if you're not familiar with the Northwestern football program, and if you're not, I don't blame you. Like, I don't really lay awake at night wondering what's going on at Northwestern football, at least before all of this happened. And I don't consider myself to be an expert with the Northwestern football program. But if you're not familiar, Pat Fitzgerald is one of those coaches that I think that he is the most ingrained in the fabric of a college football program than any other coach in college football. You could make the argument Nick Saban, just since he's brought so much success to the Alabama football program, but Pat Fitzgerald will be a very close second. Pat Fitzgerald played at Northwestern. He played on very good teams at Northwestern, and he was the head coach at Northwestern for 17 years. Pat Fitzgerald, either as a player or a coach, is responsible for well over half of Northwestern's bowl appearances. I mean, he is Mr. Northwestern. If you think of Northwestern football, the first name that comes to mind probably is Pat Fitzgerald. So that's just a little bit of background to that. So Pat Fitzgerald was suspended for 2 weeks. There was a whole lot of frustrated reaction from the Northwestern student community, from the athletics department, from really like the court of public opinion on social media and the national media. So with that pressure, the Northwestern president went from suspending Pat Fitzgerald 2 weeks to firing Pat Fitzgerald with cause. And if you read or if you know of what's going on or what happened rather that former player's stories of hazing, you can understand that firing Pat Fitzgerald absolutely is for cause, especially if he knew about what was going on in the locker room. If he didn't know what was going on in the locker room, shame on him. You're the head coach. It's your job to know what's going on in your locker room. So that's a little bit of the background of what's happening at Northwestern, why Pat Fitzgerald is gone, and the current coaching situation at Northwestern. So I was kind of out and about today, running errands, and one of my best friends went to Northwestern. He's a diehard Northwestern fan, and I get a text from him, and it's a link to an article where the headline is former LSU coach Ed Orgeron, quote, would have interest in the Northwestern vacancy. And I laughed out loud. When I first saw that, I thought it was an article in The Onion. Like that like fake news site. I thought it was an article in The Onion. I swear. I thought it was fake. I thought it was satire. I thought it was somebody pulling a prank on me. I thought my friend just found something in the depths of some weird message board. But no, 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 no. Because according to this article, a source says that Orgeron would have interest in Northwestern's opening. I have a million thoughts. And the overall thought is abso-freaking-lutely not would that ever, ever happen. And I want to explain why. And we'll get into that coming up next. I want to tell you all about FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, with FanDuel. If you just bet 20 bucks, you'll land $200 in bonus bets whether you win or lose that initial bet. That's right, $200. You can spend betting everything from the money line to the over under, who you think is going to hit the first home run. And one of my favorite things about the FanDuel Sportsbook app is that they constantly have odds boosts or promotions going on. So you can, of course, bet your money on the money line or point spreads or whatever it might be, but you can also check out a lot of the really fun promotions that are going on FanDuel every single day. And that's all on an app that is safe, that's secure, and is oh so super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There is no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Every dayers coming up tomorrow on the podcast. I got a full breakdown of what I want to hear at SEC Media Days next week. Brian Kelly is the first coach to take the podium next week at SEC Media Days. I have a pretty good idea of what we're going to hear, but I want to tell you guys what I want to hear, what I think are the most important or most intriguing tidbits and storylines for this LSU football team going into the season at this point in the summer. So we'll get into that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU. We're breaking this down. And I can't stop laughing because it doesn't feel real. Like sometimes in this job, like I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone. Like I feel like somebody is pulling a prank on me. Like there is no way that this is real. Like I remember a couple years ago, Janoris Jenkins, Jackrabbit Jenkins, he's a cornerback in the NFL. There was a story that came out that his Rolls Royce or whatever it was, like a very, very nice car, got stolen from the economy lot of the Atlanta airport. And I hate that for Jackrabbit Jenkins, but I was like, there's just no way this is real. That's hilarious. That's how I feel about this story. This report coming out, I saw this on InsideNU.com. It's kind of like a student blog at Northwestern. One of my friends that went to Northwestern sent it to me. But the essence is that, according to a source, Ed Orgeron would have interest in Northwestern's opening. Now, while my initial thought was, LOL, what? I thought about it and I thought, well, yeah, duh. Like, I'm sure he does have interest in Northwestern's opening. I'm sure he does. Because he's looking for a job, I assume. If he wants to coach, he hasn't gotten a crack at any of the openings, at least to our knowledge. So, would he have interest? I'm sure he would have interest. But the key thing here is, according to this article and from the sources that said that Ed Orgeron would have interest in Northwestern's opening, Northwestern has not contacted Ed Orgeron. Northwestern's plan for now is that David Braun, their first year defensive coordinator, will serve as the interim head coach. And it's more likely than not, at least in my opinion, and from what I've heard from a lot of insiders into the situation, is that David Braun will serve as the interim head coach for the entirety of this season. It's just a little bit too late to be conducting interviews and to bring a head coach in realistically early enough, or earliest like August 1st. That's way too late. So David Braun's been in the program. He knows the scheme. He knows the system. He knows the players. He's been with Pat Fitzgerald at least for the past few months. So they're gonna run it back with him this next season. What they choose to do in the 2024 season, I have no idea. But there at least will be an opening in theory. And I'm sure David Braun will be in consideration for it. But if I'm the Northwestern athletic director, I want to look around at different opportunities, different options. So Ed Orgeron reportedly is interested, and ha ha ha. So why the Northwestern would even have interest? I mean, Ed Orgeron won a national championship. I mean, like that is something that there aren't very many coaches in college football that can say that. Even who we consider to be some of the top coaches in college football have never done that. Lincoln Riley, Ryan Day, Brian Kelly. Ed Orgeron has. Ed Orgeron was at the helm for the best college football team in the history of the sport. And let's not forget, that wasn't just a one off. I mean, yeah, it was a national championship one off, but the year before, I mean, LSU went to the Fiesta Bowl and won 10 games. They also lost to Troy the season before, which don't love talking about that. But I mean, Ed Orgeron has had success. And he's a good coach in that he's a great motivator. He's a great recruiter. He's the kind of guy that when you go into the locker room at halftime, you're down by 10, you're looking sluggish. He's the kind of guy that you want to get your team hyped up. He's the kind of guy that everyone can rally around him. He's a great recruiter, a great motivator, a great just kind of figurehead. But here's why I don't think that it's possible or probable in the slightest that Northwestern would be interested in Ed Orgeron. Is besides those holistic things, in my opinion, I don't think that Ed Orgeron is a very good coach. Now, I love and adore Ed Orgeron for everything that he did for this LSU football program. I have a mug with his face on it. I have his book sitting right in front of me at my coffee table. I read his book in its entirety. I got it signed. I respect Ed Orgeron. I think he's a good person. I do. But I don't think he's that good of a coach. I think that would be a good coach like he was in 2019 when you get the right band of coaches around him, when you get the right coordinators that can handle the X's and O's side of things, that can handle the game plan side of things, when you give him good players, when you give him Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase, yeah, I mean, he's going to have success. But besides that, I didn't think Ed Orgeron was ever had the highest football IQ. I don't think, like, when you think about these gurus, Lincoln Riley maybe being one of them. Think of like Sean McVay in the NFL. These guys that just live, eat, and breathe offensive systems. Like, that's not the kind of guy that Ed Orgeron is. It's fun to rally around. Just not a very good coach. And also, the Northwestern football program, before all of this came out, was not known to be going against the books. I mean, it's Northwestern. And I mean that with all the respect in the world. that in an institution that holds itself to an incredibly high academic and character standard, the football program wasn't really known for putting money in McDonald's bags and paying recruits or anything else that might go on. I think that Northwestern wants to try to eliminate any further scandal from this football program. The Northwestern football program is going to have to try and scratch and claw their way out of this bad reputation that has been tarnished by all of these reports. When I think of Ed Orgeron, I don't necessarily think of he's the kind of guy that can come in and clean up your program. That he's the kind of guy that you go to when you're in desperate need of good PR. Because, yeah, he won a national title. But also, Coach Orgeron doesn't have a very good reputation. There were reports of him bringing his girlfriends to practice. I don't know if that's true or not. I wasn't there, but there's reports. And that's his reputation. And I think that being his reputation is enough. We know that part of the investigation into the LSU football program, along with the LSU men's basketball program, were in part because of things that Ed Orgeron did, because he had impermissible contact with a recruit in 2020, that there was some illegal exchange of money that was going on. And it wasn't just Ed Orgeron, it was also Les Miles, but I mean, Ed Orgeron wasn't innocent in all of that. So Ed Orgeron doesn't have the best reputation, at least where it stands right now. People love him because he's a lovable kind of guy and a lovable kind of person. But when it comes to a spotless resume, I don't think that Ed Orgeron's necessarily a candidate for that. And I think that's what Northwestern is going to be looking for. So that's why I think it's so hilarious. Is because a football program or a program in general that's going through turmoil doesn't turn to a coach that left another program, a much higher profile program, in turmoil upon his exit. It is just so wild to me. I love this. But what I want to get into coming up next, look, I'm laughing and I'm making fun and I'm poking fun. I do think that Ed Orgeron is a good person. Whatever your feelings are about Ed Orgeron, you're justified. I'm not going to tell you how to feel. Ed Orgeron did some bad things for this football program. After he won the national championship, it felt like he kicked his heels up and kind of wiped his hands and said, "My job here is done." It seemed like he gave up on the program a little bit. He did some damage. You could even make an argument, a good bit of damage to this football program. He did some bad things that really hurt LSU. He also won a national title. You could make the argument with the talent that he had and the coordinators that he had around him. There's a lot of coaches that could have won a national title with that kind of talent. But he did it. So he did good things for this university as well. But he did a whole lot of bad. So whatever you feel about Ed Orgeron and your thoughts on him, it's fine. My overall thoughts are thanks for everything, but no thanks. We'll move on. Wish you nothing but the best. And I mean that. I do wish him nothing but the best. So what is next for Ed Orgeron? That's what I want to get into coming up next. Well, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Ed Orgeron said he'd be interested in the Northwestern football coach opening, in which I say to that, I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is. But I also say to that, what? I mean, what the heck? Northwestern? Ed Orgeron? Like, Ed Orgeron felt like the perfect fit for LSU, right? Like, loud and boisterous with a thick Cajun accent. He's from Louisiana. He played college football in Louisiana. It felt like he was the personification of Louisiana State University. And it just fit until it didn't anymore. I don't know if you could find two more different vibes at two different universities than LSU in the middle of the swamp in Baton Rouge, where everyone is loud and drinks a lot and has a great time, where football is king, where football is everything, where you give us a jello shot contest and we'll blow them out of the water, versus Northwestern in the middle of the Chicago suburbs, where I think they couldn't care less about football, where they care a whole lot more about their chemistry classes and their journalism classes than they do about playing Ohio State on Saturday. Two very different vibes. Not one is wrong or right. It's just very different. So the fit is just off. It makes no sense whatsoever. But with Coach Ed Orgeron saying this, it's clear to me that he probably wants to get back into coaching. I honestly, once he was let go by LSU, I thought I probably won't coach again. $17 million buyout on top of the money that he'd already made, not just at LSU, but throughout his entire coaching career. I thought he probably wants to go out on the high of that 2019 season with the money that he's getting from LSU. I mean, he already has enough money for his kids and his grandkids and his grandkids' kids. I mean, he's good. Financially, he's good. But I get it if he has that burning passion in him to get back into coaching. So what's next for Coach O? I really don't know. It's not Northwestern, especially in the state that this program is in. I've always thought that if Coach Ed Orgeron wanted to get back into coaching, it would be probably in a smaller role, whether it be like a positional group, like a defensive line coach, whether it be like a recruiting coordinator, which again was some of the things, the allegations against him. I don't know if programs want to get in with that with Ed Orgeron or risk that, but he's a great recruiter. There, you cannot deny that. He is a wonderful recruiter. So maybe that's where his next stop could be if he wants to be in football, is as a recruiting coordinator, director of recruiting, maybe playing like an off the field administrative role. I don't know if he has any interest in doing that. I don't know how good he would be at that. I don't see it working at Northwestern. Like the next head coach at Northwestern, I view as being like a young, up and coming, squeaky clean resume kind of guy, like a Tommy Reese. Tommy Reese was at Notre Dame. He played at Notre Dame under Brian Kelly, and now he's the offensive coordinator at Alabama. Now, what he does at Alabama this year, he might just, you know, break every single offensive record at Alabama, and he'll get much better coaching offers than Northwestern. But if the offers aren't flowing in, I think that Tommy Reese or like a kind of coach like that would be a good fit. Young, hasn't had a head coaching opportunity before, but has a good reputation at really quality universities and institutions, like Tommy Reese's tenure at Notre Dame. I think that kind of coach would fit. But just not Coach O. But I want to know your thoughts about it. Like, I haven't been able to talk to my LSU friends about it. I haven't been able to share a laugh, but I want to know what you all think about this. Will Coach O get another crack at coaching? Like, do you think that now that this is out, will this maybe spark like a light bulb in the head of the athletic director at Northwestern? And he thinks, yeah, you know what? Maybe Coach Ed Orgeron would be good for us. Coach O won a national championship after all. We can do that here at Northwestern. Like, I have no idea. These are all just my opinions. But I want to know if you feel differently. It's just wild. I love sport. I love college football. I love it. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you, Coach O, for the giggle and for the drama today. I appreciate it. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. Coming up on tomorrow's podcast for all of my everydayers, I'm going to do a full preview of LSU at SEC Media Days. What I think we're going to hear isn't necessarily what I want to hear, and I'll explain on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.